Hi there, Ronnie here, and this night. This is going to be the first in a small series of really giving some tips and ideas and general thoughts to beginning GMs. Um, GMing can seem an extremely difficult task and an overwhelming one for any player to sort of take on, and I think it's only good manners to pass on some pearls of wisdom from down the years. The first thing I'll say off the bat to any beginner GM really is this: never, you'll never know it all, ever. I've been GMing now for the best part of 27 years, and I'm still learning. So don't be embarrassed that you don't know it absolutely all, and you're an absolute genius at GMing on your first game. No one expects you to be. And always remember that whilst experienced GMs can make things look really slick and uh, run things really sweetly, we GMs have learned over time and adapt rules and styles to suit us. That's one of the great myths. We adapt things to suit our style of GMing. That's why it looks good. Um, Everyone's first game is a little slower, a little more stuttering than games that we might run after that because we're getting used to it. The first few games are trepidatious. So don't be afraid that you'll make an error somewhere because you will. It's going to happen. Um, all you can do is prepare your game as best you can and just roll with a punch because it will happen. Um, I would say, with regards to GMing, just in terms of prepping a game, I would say pick a rules system. This would be my first rule. Pick a rules system that you know well, that you are comfortable with running. I would say it would be preferable if that game was a fairly rules light game that has minimal amount of bookkeeping. But ultimately, it's a game you feel comfortable with, even if it's not the game that is usually used by your gaming group. They can adapt. I would also say make the game for beginning characters, not experienced characters, not high level characters. If it's a game that uses a level system, make them first level. If it's not a game that uses levels, just straight out of the box, generate a character sheet using the basic character generation, no extras, just straight in. The reason for this is that it cuts down on the amount of uh, skills and options that the characters have, which may seem restrictive to the players, but you all start somewhere. But more importantly, it means that there are less things for you as a beginner GM to juggle in your head. I would also say for your first game, play with players you know. This is far better than playing with players you're unsure of. They don't know you, you don't know them. Knowing your players creates a certain comfort, so you can relax a little more. It's nerve-wracking enough your first GM. So play with players you know that you're comfortable with. if they're experienced gamers, they'll know that your first game will be a little slower than the average. And they'll know that because they've been there. They are either GMs themselves, in which case they know what that first game's like, or they're experienced enough that they've played in games with other novice GMs, so they know the game will be a little slower, a little more static than perhaps games they usually play. But that's fine. They know that. They go into that game knowing that and play accordingly. So my hope is that down the line of these, I'll really start to expand upon what I consider to be my 3 rules for any good gaming, which is know your system, know your scenario, and know your players. And I'll do individual videos on these. The other thing I would say about prepping, snacks are good. Make sure everyone brings snacks if you're not doing snacks yourself. Alcohol is always a problem. I don't like a lot of alcohol consumption during my games. I really don't. I think it can affect mood. I have on occasion allowed gamers to have the odd little nip of wine. I'm teetotal, so I don't drink at all. But not too much. You don't want slobbering drunks walking into your dungeon, because that really can kill a game off. Music. I find music very, very, very helpful in gaming. And there are 2 kinds of music that I will use: mood music and setting music. Mood music is essentially music to fit a particular style of scene. If you're doing a horror game, which I would strongly urge you not to do as a beginner game, if you're using a horror game, you would find music, be it classical or a film score. Film scores are very good. That has a lot of atmosphere. If it's an action game, similarly. If it's fantasy, there's plenty out there for fantasy, and sci-fi as well, that fit the mood that you're trying to get to, whether it's a big action scene or whether it's a real moment of tension or something more quiet and somber. You can always find a piece of music to underscore the scene that you're doing. The other thing is setting music, and again, classical scores, film scores, and so on can work with this. Music that is appropriate to the time period. If I'm playing a fantasy game, I will have a lot of soundtracks, particularly those from fantasy films. I will also I've got some Baroque music, or music played with medieval instruments that come from that period. Also, Gregorian chants are very good because they also have that sort of medieval monastic feel to them. So they fit the period. Classical music is exceptionally good for Victorian. Call of Cthulhu, which is a horror game, which if you play it in the classic period for the game, Call of Cthulhu is set in the 1920s, 30s. So on top of having a lot of sort of atmospheric horror music, I like to have a lot of jazz and ragtime playing, because it's appropriate to the time period. And it can help get your players into the zone. And I find that immensely helpful in getting them focused on a time period. Modern music, in terms of pop and rock and so on, I would only suggest using modern music like that if you're setting a game modern day. then it's appropriate. Other than that, it really doesn't fit, and it can jar quite stunningly with a game. Set yourself an hour either side of your gaming time. An hour before, to make sure that everyone's got their characters. Preferably get those characters done before your gaming session. Set a gaming session aside just to do characters. Don't do them that night, because it cuts into gaming time. Make sure everyone's got their characters. Everyone's there. And it also allows everyone to get the hello, how you going, what's the week been like, and get all that introductory talking out of the way, so you can get down to gaming. After the gaming session, allow yourself a brief bit of post-match analysis, because it will happen. And that allows people to say, yeah, I liked that, and I wasn't too sure of that, and take on that critique. It should never be critical, or criticism as a negative. It should always be critique. If people are being unbelievably, oh, you, an amazing game, fantastic, it's no use. It's no use, because they're not being honest with you. Similarly, if they're being biggest load of crap ever, again, they're not being honest with you. So you can dismiss both of those extremes. What you want to hear is, overall, I like that game, yeah. You know what I would have done with A or B or C? And use that. I mean, I have been guilty as a player of overselling a GM, and I've been really guilty as a GM sometimes of overselling a player. And it's never good. But I'll get to all of that in subsequent videos. So this is part 1. In part 2, I will talk about picking your system a little more. It'll probably be quite a short video, but I'll go into more detail about picking systems with examples. Okay, so this is part 1, and I'll talk to you again in part 2.